The laughter started before he finished the sentence. Henderson had barely touched the rifle. He had only lifted it, turned it 45 degrees in the light, the same way his father had shown him in Lagos 30 years ago, when he was still small enough to stand on a stool to reach the workbench. It was a reflex, as natural as breathing. But the two people behind the counter were already laughing. Not loud, not cruel in an obvious way, just that quiet, comfortable kind of laughter, the kind that doesn't bother to hide itself, the kind that says, "You don't belong here holding that." Henderson set the rifle down on the glass, carefully. He had been setting down rifles carefully since before either of them was born. "There's a fracture," he said, "in the receiver, right here." He pointed. "If someone fires this, someone gets hurt." Neither of them looked. They just laughed a little more. Henderson nodded once, picked up his jacket, and walked toward the door. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He had learned a long time ago that some rooms aren't ready for what you carry, and fighting your way in only costs you things you can't get back. He had no idea a camera was watching from the corner above the trophy case. He had no idea that the woman who owned every single inch of that building had been watching her security feed for the past 20 minutes. And he had absolutely no idea that 30 seconds of laughter, casual, forgettable, aimed at the wrong man, was about to cost two people everything. The bell above the door chimed once when Henderson walked in. It was a small sound, polite, the kind of sound that assumes everyone is welcome. Henderson had always liked that about gun shops, the way they smelled like metal and oil and careful work, the way the light caught the cases just so, the way everything inside had a purpose and a name. He had spent 30 years learning both. He paused just inside the entrance and let his eyes move across the floor the way they always did, left to right, slow, taking inventory without meaning to. It was a habit his father had given him back in Lagos before everything else. Look before you touch. Know the room before the room knows you. The shop was clean, well kept. The display cases ran in 2 long rows toward the back, glass polished, each firearm positioned at the same careful angle. Somebody here took pride in this place. He noticed that. He also noticed the man behind the counter notice him. His name tag said Robinson. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from years of being the most comfortable person in any room. He looked at Henderson the way people sometimes do when they've already made a decision and are just waiting for the facts to catch up. Henderson didn't react. He had been looked at like that before, more times than he could count, in more cities than he cared to remember. He had learned to let the look pass through him like wind through a screen door, present for a moment, and then gone. He moved toward the display cases. There was a woman browsing near the far wall, older, silver-haired, with the relaxed familiarity of someone who had been coming to this shop since before the paint was dry. She glanced at Henderson when he entered, then back at the case in front of her. No alarm, no curiosity, just a person doing what she came to do. He appreciated that too. At the register, a younger woman, Joyce, her tag read, was watching Robinson the way a compass needle watches north, ready to follow, ready to agree. Henderson had seen that before as well. He kept moving. The cases held a solid inventory, mostly hunting rifles on the left side, handguns toward the center, and then the precision builds along the back wall. The serious work, the kind of firearms that demanded respect even under glass. His eyes moved to those naturally, the way water finds the lowest point. He had his hands clasped behind his back. He was reading the serial numbers through the glass. That was when Robinson moved. He came around the counter with the kind of purposeful walk that was meant to look like helpfulness, and wasn't. He stopped beside Henderson with a practiced smile and said, "Help you find something?" "Just looking," Henderson said. Sure. Robinson tilted his head toward the left side of the store. "If you're just getting started, we've got some great options over on the entry-level wall. Good quality, solid price points. A lot of first-timers find it easier to—" "I'm not a first-timer," Henderson said. He said it quietly, without edge. The same way he said most things. Robinson's smile held. Of course, I just meant these back cases are a little more specialized. Competition grade, some of them. We find most customers are more comfortable starting with. Henderson had stopped listening, not out of rudeness. Out of 30 years of knowing when a sentence was going somewhere worth following and when it wasn't. He was looking at the rifle in Bay 3. It was a bolt-action precision build, well-maintained on the surface, the kind of piece that looked perfect under showroom light. And it did look perfect. Almost. Henderson's jaw tightened just slightly, just enough that he noticed it himself. He reached into the case. His hand was steady. "Sir, I'd prefer if you didn't." "I know." He lifted the rifle with both hands, turned it 45 degrees the way his father had shown him, held it toward the light that came through the window above the trophy case. The same motion, the same angle. 30 years of muscle memory moving through his hands before his mind had fully caught up. And there it was. Behind him, Robinson said something to Joyce. On low enough that it wasn't meant to carry. Joyce made the sound she made, that almost laugh, that comfortable private little sound between two people who had already agreed on something. Henderson set the rifle down. "There's a fracture in the receiver," he said. "Hairline, left side, just forward of the bolt. If someone fires this, it's going to fail in a way that doesn't stay in the gun." Robinson looked at him, not at the rifle, at him. He did not look at the rifle. "I appreciate the concern," Robinson said with a smile that had stopped trying to be warm. "But our inventory is inspected regularly, and I think—" "I know what I saw," Henderson said. The shop was quiet for a moment. The woman by the far wall, Mary, had gone very still. Henderson picked up his jacket from where he had rested it against the case. He looked at the rifle one more time, then he turned and walked toward the door. What he didn't see, what he had no reason to look for, was the small red light blinking steadily above the trophy case. The camera it belonged to had a clean angle on the entire floor. It had been recording everything since the moment he walked in, and somewhere above the ceiling in an office Henderson didn't know existed, a woman he had never met in person reached for her phone. The bell above the door chimed again. This time it sounded different, or maybe it was the same and Henderson just heard it differently, the way the same note can mean hello in one moment and goodbye in the next. He stepped out onto the sidewalk and let the door close behind him. The afternoon air was warm and smelled like exhaust and cut grass, and the particular kind of nothing that cities offer when you need something to hold on to. He stood there for a moment, just breathing. 30 years. 30 years of learning a craft so precisely, so completely, that he could feel the difference between a well-seated bolt and a compromised one the way a pianist feels a dead key, not by thinking about it, but by touch, by instinct, by the accumulated weight of 10,000 hours that lived in his hands now rather than his head. And the man inside had not looked at where he pointed. Henderson straightened his jacket, put one foot in front of the other, and walked to his car. He did not slam the door when he got in. He did not sit there staring at the building. He started the engine, checked his mirrors, and pulled out of the parking lot the way he always did everything, with care and without theater. Inside Cornerstone Firearms, the bell's echo faded. Robinson watched the door for a moment after it closed. Then he exhaled, a small, satisfied sound like a man who had successfully managed a situation before it became inconvenient, and turned back toward the counter. He picked up the tablet he'd set down when Henderson walked in and resumed whatever he'd been doing before the interruption. "Entry-level wall," Joyce said from behind the register. She said it the way people repeat a punchline when they want to keep the joke alive a little longer. Robinson almost smiled. "Not our demographic." He shrugged one shoulder, tapping something on the tablet. "It happens." The shop settled back into its rhythms. A customer near the ammunition wall made a selection and carried it to the register. The refrigeration unit behind the water dispenser hummed steadily. Outside, a truck passed on the main road. The rifle in Bay 3 sat exactly where Henderson had placed it, receiver facing up. The hairline fracture invisible now. The light had shifted, the angle was wrong, and no one was looking anyway. Mary had not moved from the far wall. She was a careful woman by nature, the kind of person who returned shopping carts and always signaled before changing lanes, who had lived long enough to know that the moments that required courage were usually quieter than you expected them to be. She had been coming to Cornerstone for 22 years. She knew Robinson by name. She had attended the shop's anniversary sale 4 years running. She stood now with a box of .22 cartridges in her hand that she had picked up 10 minutes ago and had not yet set down, and she looked at the rifle in Bay 3, and then she looked at Robinson, who was scrolling his tablet and humming something low under his breath, and then she looked at the camera above the trophy case, the small one, the one with the red light, and then she looked back at the rifle. She set the cartridges down on the nearest flat surface. She did not buy them. She walked to the exit without stopping at the register, and the bell above the door chimed a third time, and nobody noticed. Upstairs, Rose Morgan had already seen enough. Her office was at the back of the building's second floor above the stockroom, and the monitor on her desk was divided into 6 feeds from the shop floor below. She had pulled up the security system 40 minutes ago after an email she'd received that morning, anonymous, 3 sentences describing a pattern of behavior at the front counter that had made her set down her coffee and go very still. She had watched Henderson walk in. She had watched Robinson's shoulders change when the door opened. She had watched the intercom call and Joyce's face and the careful way Henderson moved through the cases and the rifle in Bay 3. She had watched him turn it in the light. She had watched him point. She had watched Robinson not look. Her jaw was tight. She had been holding it tight for several minutes without noticing. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Rogers, her floor technician who was in the stockroom 2 doors down. Pull the Remington 700 in Bay 3 right now. Do not put it back on the floor. She sent it. She set the phone down. She turned back to the monitor. Below her, Robinson was still at the counter. The tablet, the humming, the easy, unbothered rhythm of a man who believed the afternoon had gone exactly as it should. The rifle sat in its case, waiting, patient as a fault line. Rose's phone buzzed. Rogers, done. What am I looking for? She typed back. Receiver, left side, forward of the bolt. She waited. The monitor glowed in the quiet of the office. 40 seconds passed. Then Rogers again. Hairline fracture. How did you know? Rose looked at the screen for a long moment, at the empty spot where Henderson had been standing, at the display case, at Robinson still scrolling. I didn't, she typed back. Someone else did. She set the phone down. She reached for the desk drawer where she kept her personnel files, and she found the one she was looking for, and she opened it, and she read the name at the top. The one she already knew by heart. Then she picked up her phone again. This time, she dialed. Henderson drove home the long way, not because the traffic was bad, not because he had somewhere else to be, just because sometimes the long way gave a thing enough room to settle before you had to walk it through a door and into the life you had built, the life that was still good, the life that deserved better than whatever mood you brought home in your jacket pocket. He took the route that went past the community college, past the park with the broken fountain that had been broken for 3 years now, and past the stretch of road where the oak trees had grown tall enough to meet overhead and make a kind of tunnel in the afternoon light. He had driven this road the first week he arrived in this city. He had driven it the day he brought Eloise home from the hospital, one hand on the wheel and one eye on the rearview mirror every 30 seconds. Certain that a newborn was simply too small and too important to transport by ordinary car. He had driven it the morning his wife died, though he could not remember doing so. He drove it now. The light came through the oaks in long, soft pieces. He breathed. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the afternoon had cooled. The house was quiet in the way it got when Eloise was home but working, a particular kind of occupied silence full of concentration rather than absence. He went to the kitchen first, poured a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink, looking at the backyard where the grass needed cutting again. Then he went to the workshop. It was a converted back room, what the house's original owners had used for storage, what Henderson had slowly transformed over 6 years into something that was entirely his own. Pegboards on 2 walls, each tool hanging in its designated place. A long wooden workbench scarred and stained in patterns that told the history of everything he had repaired on its surface. The smell of gun oil and steel and the particular dry warmth of a room that generated its own small climate. He sat down on the stool at the bench and didn't pick anything up. He just sat. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later when Eloise appeared in the doorway. She was 16 and looked more like her mother every month in ways that Henderson noticed and never mentioned. She had her school laptop under one arm and the expression she wore when she wanted something but hadn't yet decided how to ask for it. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She leaned against the doorframe, looking around the workshop the way she always did, with a combination of familiarity and mild bewilderment, as though she had accepted long ago that she would never fully understand what went on in here but had made peace with that. "I need help with something." Henderson waited. "I have a presentation for history. We're supposed to find an example of an immigrant who contributed something to American industry." She paused. "A personal example. Someone we know." Henderson looked at his hands on the workbench. "Ask Mr. Patterson. And he was born in Trinidad. He's been building furniture in this city for 40 years. "I don't know Mr. Patterson," Eloise said. "I know you." The workshop was quiet. "Dad, I just need one thing, one example, something you made, something you fixed, something you can show me." He was quiet for long enough that she shifted her weight in the doorway, preparing, he knew, for a deflection. He had given her many over the years, on many topics, and she had learned to read the pause before one arrived. Instead, he stood up. He crossed to the locked cabinet in the far corner, the tall one, the one she had asked about exactly once at age 12 and never asked about again. He took his keys from his pocket. He unlocked it. Inside, on a padded shelf, sat a rifle that did not belong in any normal cabinet in any normal house. It was a precision competition piece, bolt action, with a stock Henderson had refinished from bare damaged wood over the course of 4 months. Every component had been disassembled, assessed, repaired, or replaced. The trigger mechanism alone had taken him 3 weeks. 2 other gunsmiths, men with good reputations and legitimate credentials, had looked at it in its original state and told him it wasn't worth the time. He lifted it out with both hands and set it on the workbench. Eloise was very still in the doorway. She came in slowly, the way people approach things they sense are important. She stood beside him and looked at the clean lines of it, the obvious care in every surface, the way it seemed to be in a slightly different category than ordinary objects. She took out her phone and photographed it. She didn't ask. She just raised the camera and took 3 shots from different angles, steady and sure, and Henderson watched her do it. He didn't stop her. Something in his chest that had been holding tension since that afternoon, since Bay 3, since Robinson's non-look, since Joyce's sound, shifted slightly. Not gone, but different. Eloise lowered her phone and looked at him. "Did they like it?" she asked. "At the shop today?" Henderson looked at the rifle on the workbench, at the grain of the refinished stock, at 9 months of work that 2 other men had said couldn't be done. He didn't answer. He lifted the rifle carefully, placed it back in the cabinet, and closed the door. The lock clicked. He was still holding his keys when his phone buzzed on the workbench. Unknown number. He looked at it. The screen glowed for 4 rings and then went dark. Suddenly he put his keys down. He went to the kitchen and made dinner, and they ate together, and Eloise talked about her presentation, and he listened, and the evening moved in its ordinary way, and he was grateful for every minute of it. An hour after dinner, he was washing a glass at the sink when his phone buzzed again. Different this time. A notification, voicemail. The name on the screen was Rose Morgan's office. He set the glass down. He picked up the phone. He looked at the notification for a long time. The way you look at an envelope you're not sure you want to open because once you read what's inside, you can't go back to not knowing. He had spent 15 years preparing for a door to open. He just hadn't expected it to sound exactly like this. He pressed play. The voicemail was 41 seconds long. A woman's voice, not Rose. Is an assistant, calm and unhurried, asked Henderson to come to Cornerstone Firearms the following morning at 9 o'clock. She gave the address, which he already knew. She said Ms. Morgan looked forward to seeing him. She said to call if there were any scheduling conflicts. She said thank you and goodbye. That was all. No tone that revealed anything. No warmth, no chill, no hint buried in the pauses. Just 41 seconds of professional nothing. The kind of message that could mean 10 different things depending on what you were afraid of when you pressed play. Henderson stood at the kitchen sink and listened to it once. Then he listened to it again. The second time he focused on the assistant's voice. The specific weight of each word. The half second between Ms. Morgan and looks forward. He had spent a career learning to read the language inside the language. The thing people were saying underneath the thing they were saying. He couldn't find it here. The message had been constructed not to be found. He played it a third time, standing in the same spot, the water still running in the sink, going cold. The third time, it sounded like a cancellation. He turned off the tap. He set the phone face down on the counter and looked at the window above the sink, at the dark yard beyond it, at his own faint reflection in the glass. He had been here before, not in this kitchen, not with this particular door, but in this exact interior place. The place where hope and its cost sat on the same scale, and you had to decide before the morning came how much weight you were willing to carry either way. He had learned the hard way that hope was not free. It had a price you paid whether it worked out or not. When it didn't work out, you paid it in the sharp currency of having wanted something out loud. He had paid that price enough times to have developed certain habits. Practical ones, the methodical work of preparing for disappointment so that it arrived as confirmation rather than surprise. He dried his hands. He turned off the kitchen light. Eloise was at the dining room table, laptop open, the presentation still in progress, 3 browser tabs visible from where he stood in the doorway. She had her mother's habit of working with her chin in her hand, elbow on the table, head tilted slightly left. "I may be home early tomorrow," Henderson said. She didn't look up. Her fingers kept moving on the keyboard. "You always finish things, Dad." She said it the way she said most true things, without ceremony, without looking at him, as though the statement was simply a fact she was reporting rather than something she had chosen to offer. He stood in the doorway a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went to bed. He did not sleep well, but he slept. At 5:43, he was awake before the alarm. At 6, he was dressed. Good trousers, the dark gray ones, the shirt that required ironing and that he had ironed the night before without consciously deciding to. He made coffee. He drank half of it standing up. He left the rest. At 7, he was in the car. He drove without music. The city was still waking up around him. Delivery trucks, early joggers, the particular pale quality of morning light that hadn't yet committed to the day. He took the long route, not because he needed more time, but because arriving 45 minutes early would only give him 45 minutes to sit in a parking lot and listen to his own thoughts, and he had already done enough of that. He stopped at a gas station, filled the tank, though it didn't need it. Went inside and bought a bottle of water he didn't drink. Stood by the car for 4 minutes looking at nothing in particular. Then he got back in and drove. At 8:58, he parked outside Cornerstone Firearms. The sign was lit. The door was unlocked. Through the front window, he could see the display cases, the trophy case, the overhead lights making everything bright and orderly and exactly as it had looked yesterday. He sat with both hands on the steering wheel for a moment, not hesitating, just marking the moment the way his father had taught him to mark things, with attention, before they became the past. He got out of the car, he walked to the door, he pushed it open. The bell chimed. The shop floor was quiet in the way it wasn't quite open yet. No browsing customers, no transaction sounds, just the hum of the refrigeration unit and the overhead lights and the particular stillness of a place between states. Robinson and Joyce were standing near the far end of the main display case, not behind it, not working, just standing, side by side, not quite looking at each other, the way people stand when they've been told to wait somewhere and don't know why and have had enough time to start worrying about it. Robinson looked at Henderson when he entered. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt. Something earlier than guilt. A recognition, maybe. The rapid private arithmetic of a man who had just connected 2 things he hadn't thought were related. Then he looked away. Joyce was already looking at the floor. Her arms were crossed, one hand at her mouth. She did not look up. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved toward the counter. Henderson stood inside the door in the ringing silence of the bell's last echo and understood, not everything, but enough, that this morning was not going to be what he had prepared for. At the back of the shop, a door stood open. Yellow light from inside it fell in a clean rectangle across the floor. From somewhere within came the quiet sound of movement. A chair, a breath, someone who had been waiting and had heard the bell and had gone still. Henderson looked at the open door. He looked at Robinson, who was studying the middle distance with great focus. He looked at Joyce, who had not moved. He took a breath. He picked up his feet. He walked toward the light. The office was smaller than he expected. That was the first thing Henderson noticed. Not Rose Morgan, not the desk, not Robinson and Joyce already seated in the two chairs near the window, but the size of the room. He had imagined something proportional to what it represented, something with weight to it. Instead, it was a working office. Practical, organized, a desk with papers on it, a monitor, a whiteboard with handwriting that hadn't been erased, two framed photographs he couldn't see clearly from the doorway. The kind of room where actual decisions got made rather than announced. Rose was standing behind the desk when he entered. She was somewhere in her 50s. With the bearing of someone who had spent decades in a business that required her to be taken seriously before she opened her mouth and had decided early on that she would simply behave as though that were already settled. She wore no expression he could read easily. She looked at Henderson when he came in, directly without the rapid assessment he had learned to brace for. And she said, "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." There was one chair remaining to the left of Robinson and Joyce. Henderson sat. Rose looked at all three of them. "Thank you for coming in this morning," she said. "I want to show you something." She didn't explain what. She turned to the wall screen behind her desk, a monitor mounted at eye level, and she pressed a key. The footage was date-stamped from the previous afternoon. The angle was from above and to the left, the camera above the trophy case, the one with the small red light. It showed the full length of the main display cases clear and still, the overhead lights making everything sharp. In the lower right of the frame, the time counter moved in silent tenths of seconds. Then Henderson walked into frame. He watched himself from above, watched himself move through the cases with his hands clasped behind his back, reading serial numbers through the glass. Watched Robinson come around the counter, watched the conversation he already knew by heart play out in complete silence. And then Rose turned the volume up. Robinson's voice filled the room. "These back cases are a little more specialized. We find most customers are more comfortable." Henderson heard himself say, "I'm not a first-timer," he heard. Very clearly, the sound Joyce made. In the shop yesterday, it had been brief enough that he had processed it and moved past it in the same motion. Here, in this small room, with three people sitting close enough that he could hear them breathing, it arrived differently. It landed and stayed. He kept his face still. The footage continued. He watched himself lift the rifle. Turn it 45 degrees. He watched his own hand point, one finger clear and unhurried, at the receiver. He watched Robinson's eyes not move to where he was pointing. He watched himself set the rifle down, pick up his jacket, walk out of frame. The bell above the door appeared in the upper edge of the shot. He watched it move. Then the footage ended. Rose left the silence alone for a moment. Nobody in the room filled it. Robinson was looking at the now dark screen with the expression of a man doing rapid calculations. Joyce had her hands folded in her lap, very still, the way people go still when they are hoping stillness makes them smaller. Rose pulled up a second document. "This is a floor inspection report," she said, "filed by Rogers at 4:47 yesterday afternoon." She read from it without editorializing. "Hairline fracture. Receiver. Bay 3. Confirmed. Rifle flagged and removed from display inventory pending assessment." She set the document down. "I texted Rogers 40 minutes after this footage," she said, "before the inspection, before I had confirmation of anything." She paused. "I pulled that rifle based on what one customer said to two members of my staff and what my staff chose not to do with it." Robinson's chair moved slightly. "Ms. Morgan, I want to be clear that we had no reason to..." I know what you had reason to do, Rose said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I watched you not do it. She listened to him finish his sentence anyway, with the full level attention of someone who had made her decision the previous afternoon and was under no pressure of any kind. Joyce said something after him, something about the shop floor being busy, about not wanting to alarm other customers, about meaning no disrespect. Rose nodded through it with the same expression. Then she opened the desk drawer. She placed 2 envelopes on the surface side by side and slid them forward. Robinson looked at his envelope. His jaw moved once. He picked it up. He stood. Joyce stood beside him. Neither of them looked at Henderson. The door opened. The door closed. The office was very quiet. Rose did not move for a moment. Then she turned to Henderson, fully for the first time since he had walked in, and something in her expression changed. Not softened exactly, settled, as though she had been holding a particular tension for 24 hours and had just set it down. I pulled that rifle, she said, because of what you said, before Rogers confirmed it, before I pulled your resume, before I knew anything about you except that you pointed at something and said it clearly and you were right. She let that land. That is an uncommon thing. Henderson said nothing. His hands were quiet in his lap. I've been in this business for 30 years, Rose said. I know the difference between a person who knows firearms and a person who has grown into them. You were 9 years old when you learned that motion. I could see it. She sat down. She opened a folder on her desk. Inside it, and he recognized the papers, had reviewed his own copy so many times the corners had softened, was the partnership agreement. When can you start? She said. He signed the agreement at her desk with a pen she offered, and he accepted without looking at it. Later that week, a small plaque appeared near Bay 3. No announcement, no ceremony, just a small brass rectangle mounted quietly at eye level, reading, "Every firearm on this floor has been inspected by a master gunsmith." Most customers walked past it without stopping. A few read it and nodded slightly, the way people acknowledge something that simply seems correct. Eloise came in on a Thursday afternoon, laptop under her arm, and finished her school presentation standing in front of the display case, her phone propped against a box of cleaning supplies, her father standing beside her answering questions about the craft in the careful, unhurried way he answered everything. She got an A. She framed the grade slip and put it in the workshop, which Henderson pretended not to notice and looked at when she wasn't home. Rogers found Henderson in the stockroom one morning and asked, with the straightforward curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to understand, how he had spotted the fracture so quickly. Henderson picked up a rifle from the nearest rack and turned it 45 degrees in the light. The same angle, the same motion, the reflex that lived in his hands rather than his head, and showed him where to look. Rogers looked. He saw it immediately. And he stood there a moment with the particular expression of someone who has just learned something they will carry for the rest of their life. Henderson walked out onto the floor. He went behind the counter. His counter now, his and Rose's, the paperwork signed and the keys given, and the door he had been walking toward for 15 years finally standing open behind him. And he rested both hands on the glass case and looked out at the shop. The light came through the front windows in long, clean lines. The display cases ran in 2 neat rows. Every firearm on the floor had been handled, assessed, approved. The work was good. The room was his. He stood there for a moment in the quiet, in the light, in the ordinary, extraordinary fact of being exactly where he was supposed to be. The ones who wave you toward the exit have no idea what's waiting for you at the door.